us some example of your work in Bosnia and also these people you work with? Something maybe particularly challenging or something particularly successful that you had to do?
Well, my work was always in communication. I'm a former journalist. The field which I love, the field which I think in the last 20 or 30 years also went through very dynamic changes because everything is about communication and the way you let people know. So when I came, I was called the head of public affairs spokesperson for the United Nations. So basically I was sent there to find modern ways to communicate with the people and with the world. During the war, I think the main means of communication was press conferences, because basically what was happening, there were lots of incidents, there were lots of NATO or UN police dealing with the incidents, and there was a lot of information, like in modern world today, about, I don't know, things happening in the world. Some, you know, every day there are, so it was a bit like that. So I had to develop the whole strategy about how to communicate both with the Bosniaks and with the world in different ways. And we did lots of good things. I had about 30 people working. There were probably 5 or 6 internationals from different countries, like in the UN, and about 20 people locally recruited. That was very interesting to work with them because they were open. They were probably like me when I was telling you about the US. It was a prestigious job for them. They wanted to learn from internationals. They liked what they were doing. They were very dynamic and very fast growing. So it was very nice to work always with the missions, with, you know, with the people from there. What are the interesting things? For example, well, I'll give you very different examples. This tram, which I told you, Sarajevo is a long street of 12 kilometers. I remember once we decided to make a UN tram, which was really, really nice. It was a UN blue tram, which was running every day. And many people took it and they liked it. We were the mission which created a completely different example. I remember we were the first in the UN to create the website. Today it sounds ridiculous, but that's how it was. UN missions at those times still didn't have a website. So in 2000 we had this idea. We found some local people, and that was the first United Nations mission to create its own website, to communicate for that. That's a completely different example. Then there was another example that, for example, Kofi Annan, who was a very brilliant Secretary General, was visiting Sarajevo, and obviously there was a big fuss. And suddenly I got a telephone call saying that, you know what, we're going to have a PR event, and I was very fresh, but actually we have to organize the birth of the 6th billionth child in Sarajevo. And be careful, because it has to be a mixed ethnicity child. So anyway, a typical PR event, those who know PR, and there was quite a big undertaking dealing with the hospital, figuring out, I don't know, I can't remember, I think it was the first child born in after midnight. And it has to be a mixed couple, Bosniak and Serb. And then I figured out that there was, actually, I think there was, I may make a mistake now, but somebody like a niece of the, of one of the presidents of Bosnia then, who was kind of put in the screenshot as a nurse, and etc., etc. There was the whole range of things happening. Well, basically there was a world event, the 6th billion child born in Sarajevo. And then there was a sad story, because obviously, well, I mean, sad or not sad, because this family was in touch with me for a couple of years, because you have this PI event, but then obviously nobody deals with you after that. Nobody kind of, you know, supports you for life, and they probably expected that they will be supported for life by the UN, or I don't know, paid a pension or whatever it is. So anyway, I think with this example, life, I talk about Ivo Andrić, life in Sarajevo at that time with this completely surreal international setting with a completely incredible mix of people, but it was a little bit like that because every day there were absolutely incredible events happening, you know, like a puzzle. It was very interesting. It was happy because how should I say? It wasn't perfect, but at least people were not killing each other. So I think you know, I told you about this green and these houses with the holes and etc. etc. At that stage, it on the superficial thing, it was maintained fairly peaceful. There was one or another incident, but you know, there were no mass killings or mass incident. But you could also feel that it's a superficial feeling because deep in heart, of course, the problems, it's very difficult to overcome such problems when they become so rooted. It's not that everybody starts liking each other, you know, on the next day and loving each other and hugging and etc. They maintain certain peace. As I say, it was very difficult to agree anything because everybody would be polite, but they would not agree on anything, or particularly if you think of Mostar, another place which now looks completely different because I remember it in time when the bridge was destroyed, and that was sad, shabby, destroyed place. 5 years ago when I went there, I couldn't believe my eyes because I saw the bridge full of like Turkish market and, you know, zillions of tourists coming, and I haven't seen it before the war, but it strikes you. It strikes you, you know, where you can go from one place to another. But the interesting thing that that the combination in this slightly superficially peaceful place with a nice green. Ah, that's another image. I come back to the green. Again, I came fresh. I didn't have those experiences of war times and etc. But then we were told. I mean, we were told officially in the UN, and we were told by the colleagues, don't ever step on the green. First, you don't understand that. Well, I mean, what does it mean? Because there was something about 1 million bombs in this green, I mean in the forests. So the rule was never, you drive by the road, but you never actually stop the car and go for a walk, for hiking. Just don't step on the green. Because there was a huge undertaking, you know. It took not such a long time ago, 3 or 4 years, to mine the whole country. But it took a huge amount of force. There was to undermine, or how do you call it, to unmine, to take out all those mines there, and obviously in times which we were there. So it all gives an impression of fragility, like fragility. You have the green, you look at it, but you don't step at that. You have the peace, but this peace is fragile. But also it gave a feeling of kind of very dynamical development and certain happiness because there was no war at that stage. It was stopped.
Okay, could you just tell us a little bit about your life in Sarajevo, your friends?
Well, I told you about this long street in Sarajevo and about the hills. So obviously Sarajevo have different parts, but it has this historical center, which is a really nice one and which has a mix of what could be called like a totally Turkish bazaar and place, Basharcha. Lots of mosques and lots of minarets, a Catholic church, an Orthodox church, and it's all within kind of 10-minute walking. And that's what makes this strange, unique flavor which many, many people like. So I quickly discovered that the nice place is to be on the hill, and I had a fantastic Bosniak family, Fikreta. They had a house. It was right on the center, but on the hill of the house, on the hill, on the top of the hill. So they basically rented an upper part of the house, so I could go through them and come. And the nicest thing that I had a big terrace from which I could see all the minarets and the whole Sarajevo, and it was really nice. So my life there, or my friends, were all sorts of friends. Well, as I said, in the UN there were lots of international. There was an American, there was an Indian, there was an Australian, there were all sorts of people, and lots of Bosniak people. I quickly met two journalists who were recommended by some other friends. I had a friend, for example, in New York who worked for Associated Press, who told me. So one was the journalist who is still there, Aida Cherkez, who was the head of Associated Press in Bosnia, and another one, Duška Juricic, who worked for the television, and they became really close friends. It's interesting also because I was, well, some of the UN colleagues suggested, since I came in mid-April, one of the first weekends, I think it was maybe a long weekend, strange concept, kind of European concept, they said, why don't we go to the sea? And they took me to the sea, and I discovered what is now a Croatian coast. It's actually a 4-hour drive from Sarajevo to get to Dubrovnik. And that was another very interesting image, because that was '99, that was the year when Belgrade was bombed, when Kosovo was already happening. We drove, and again this green and this nice area, and the bridges rebuilt by S4, and then you come to this amazing sea landscape of Croatian coasts with islands, with beauty, with the sea. The only trouble is the weather was perfect, 25 degrees Celsius. The sea was already okay, 20 degrees of Celsius. The only trouble that at that time it looked as if there was a neutron bomb or something dropped, because there wasn't a single person. It was early in the season, but most likely all the tourists, there were few tourists then, not like now, but those few tourists who liked coming there because of the bombing of Belgrade, which is quite far away. You know, you get this news in Italy or somewhere, and people will say, no, we're not going to go to this area. So I first couldn't understand, because I saw this incredible beauty and not a single person. You know, really like after neutron bomb. But it's nice because this coast, I'm in love with that coast, and it's a completely different, of course, feel than Sarajevo. But from time to time we liked going there. And I think from the very first day, on the one hand, you see the war and you feel the war. On the other hand, it's peaceful on the surface, and there are lots of vegetables, and the people there like drinking coffee and like talking. So there were lots of kavarni and lots of communication and lots of things to do. So life was there just dynamic and interesting, and all about doing things and observing things and finding your ways. But it was, and of course the minarets. Every time from the balcony I was coming out and trying to count how many minarets were there. I could never count. I don't know what it is, 20, 25, more. There were a lot of a lot of mosques and a lot of minarets, and obviously that's what you hear. But you also heard the bells of the Catholic Church and the small, very old Orthodox Church, and I hope it can preserve in this nice mix.
And when did you get to Kosovo? How did you get to Kosovo?
How did I get to Kosovo? I stayed in Sarajevo, Bosnia, because, well, I mean, I was visiting Republika Srpska and some other areas of Bosnia for 2 years and 3 months. And I was looking for some change of something, and an opportunity came up to go to Kosovo. It already happened then, and people started going. So basically I was offered a transfer, and that was 2001. early stages of the UN mission, not the earliest, but the early ones, kind of the second row. So I think I came there something like 30th of July 2001. And obviously I have been thinking, but I guess those almost 2.5 years in Bosnia determined a lot. Well, your background, your knowledge always determines the way you see things. So that determined a lot how I saw Kosovo. I always saw Kosovo a little bit through the Balkan or Bosnian prism. In what sense? In practical terms, because I have been living, or I had an experience of another conflict. Of course, conflicts has circumstances, but it's also a conflict. So now I came like to the second conflict, but with the experience of how it happened and what were the relationships and what could be done and what could not be done. And I already told that it was difficult to negotiate anything or to agree on anything in Bosnia. And secondly, obviously, I was living, I was surrounded by people, and I was doing myself in communication field, you know, through what is being done to rebuild the country after the war, again in practical terms. And that's a lot is determined, of course, by the purposes and the United Nations missions. If we speak about that, the United Nations mission, the mandates were completely different. The United Nations mission in Bosnia was basically dealing with two things: police and judiciary. A big shock for me when I came to Kosovo, and in Bosnia there were other international organizations which were dealing with other subjects, so it was, you know, separated by tasks. But the United Nations mission in Kosovo was pretty much a government. So it was much more in terms of experience and much larger. You want me to continue on? Well, I mean, I guess also first, I don't know what I expected. Well, you just have some experience, you hear something from the news. Well, I guess I can't remember, but I guess I'm trying to remember whether I came by plane or by car. Plane, probably. Well, anyway, suddenly I can't remember the way I came. The perception was different. Well, I was expecting Bosnian green, but I didn't see Bosnian green, because Pristina, that's the place where I landed and when mostly I was. Later on I did travel and I saw some other areas, but Pristina is not green. It's a city, probably size of Sarajevo, but if Sarajevo was very long and surrounded by mountains, Pristina is kind of in a low, flat, low place. Not really. Mountains are seen on the distance. They're not close. Well, I mean, everybody knows that it's a Soviet place with those grey buildings, as we see in many Soviet places. So it's not particularly nice. But I think that there were a few physical feelings which, and everybody was talking about Grand Hotel, which has this fame before the war, and then the UN was there, and during the war it was kind of, anyway, the place, typical 20 floor something, grey building, like many hotels. I don't know, if you go to Siberia or former Soviet Union or in Russia, you see lots of buildings like that. What happened then? I don't know what you expect. I guess I came from this slightly, how should I say, cheerful and nice Bosnian atmosphere which we had because you already settled there, you already lived there, and life was going on to this new place. First thing which strikes you, and these are probably not the nicest images, is dust. Because somehow everything in Kosovo was full of dust always. Well, in Moscow also, because of rain and because of climate and because of land and because of whatever, you can never have your shoes clean. It's always full of dust or mud or something. But Kosovo was this dry dust, and through this period where I lived there, you had a feeling that you kind of breathe in the particles of something, because it's always grey and it's always dust. It's also fairly cloudy. I think it was a little bit less sunny somehow than some other places in the Balkans. The second feeling is noise, because you live with the noise all the time for a very simple reason. There was no electricity then. There was no clear, plan, but what the international community was trying to do to at least give electricity 2 hours and 4 hours interruption. So everybody would have generators. So if you have lots of houses and zillions of generators who are working pretty much all the time, you are constantly with the noise. I wasn't quite sure, because I was coming as a Russian. And I wasn't quite sure in Bosnia I had a fairly safe life. But, you know, I think politically you feel, unlike Bosnia, which everything was very, very, very difficult, but at least the international community was investing all their efforts to try people communicate and work together. I mean, Bosnian, Croats and the Serbs. But I think the very first physical feeling in Kosovo, because the way the conflict developed, was a wall. This is a wall, and the international community is not going to overcome it. And that was politically a different feeling, because you work in a very difficult circumstances, but you kind of try, or here you understand it's a wall and you can't do anything. I'm talking about the relationships of Albanians and Serbs, honestly. And that determined a lot the political work. Anyway, safety, coming back to safety. So I wasn't quite sure how I'm going to see as a Russian, because with all the biases, well, I kind of thought, okay, the Albanians are going to say she's Russian, she's pro-Serb. Am I safe? Am I going to be well taken? Am I going to be able to do my job? These are the questions which are kind of in your head, which are normal human. So my reaction was a funny one, because standing, checking in, I don't know, somewhere, I don't know, there was like a short line. I think I turned my head and there was a guy standing behind me, and asked him, "Are you also coming?" He said, "Yes, I also." "Where are you going to stay?" "In Pristina." And I told him, "Why don't we live together?" I don't mean live together in any terms, but I guess it was my protective side, like, okay, why not, I don't know, couple with somebody. And that was a very nice feeling, because it ended up in a very unexpected community. And I'm going to talk about this international community in Kosovo. The guy, my friend Antonio, was from Brazil. He was working with IT and with the website that was just developing. Well, I told you in Bosnia that was the first website that we created. Yes, actually I got to Kosovo because somebody whom I met in Bosnia, Simon Hazlick, who was the spokesperson or head of public information for Office of High Representative, moved there and he called me, and that's how the transfer happened. I forgot to tell you this thing. So I turned to Antonio. Anyway, we ended up, and he said, yes, why not? Let's, share an apartment or whatever. And we started looking for an apartment, or somebody suggested to us. And he said, yes, some guys are suggesting something. And we went. We ended up living in a nice, I have Spanish background in the sense of languages. I speak 6 languages and I studied a lot of Spanish literature. So we ended up in a nice company of 3 Latin American guys and myself. Lots of fun. One was Peruvian, one was Chilean, Antonio was from Brazil, and myself. Now, why is it important? 2 things. When things on well, there's also life besides work. So when common things are difficult, common things, I mean light, water, heating, and all these things were difficult. There were no water, there was no light most of the time. UN also, of course, in the office had generators. So there are 2 things happen. You become closer to the people. Well, first of all, you have less opportunities to go, and what are you going to do? To go for a walk on dusty street? To go and find some place to run or to do sports or whatever? To read a book with a candle is a little bit more complicated. Anyway, you become closer. You start helping each other. You form a nice community, and you chat a lot, and you find kind of nice solutions, and you help. So whatever I thought, it wasn't exactly the issue of safety, but kind of, I don't know, some surreal thought, but it ended up basically in a nice group of people living in a nice way. and helping each other, and the nice communication was, I think, another side also of Kosovo shortcomings of things. What do you do when you don't have electricity in your refrigerator? How are you going to keep, I don't know, food or whatever? So we came with a nice solution. We decided that we're always going to have cheese and wine. Well, at least they don't get spoiled when the refrigerator is switched off for 4 hours. So in the evenings we had quite a lot of, well, you would call it parties. It wasn't exactly parties, but kind of sitting, chatting, somebody dropping in, communicating, telling stories, etc., just with cheese and wine. And that was nice. It was almost like, in good terms, almost like an atmosphere of a pioneer camp or something. You know, when you get to community, it's community. It's community can have good things and bad things, as we know, but international community there was more of a community than probably in some other places. And certainly in a very settled life, you kind of tend to communicate less because you have more things to do on your own, and etc.
Okay. What about what we call the locals? Communication with the locals?
The communication with the locals. How should I say? So I had this issue of being Russian. It's interesting. I think it's about the whole world. It's about racism, etc. When you know that you are not seen, or that you can be seen, I don't know, as a black or as a Syrian or as a Russian or as a Serb, you know that there is a bit of stigma. Well, I mean, for me it wasn't an issue of life and death. I mean, but it's a strange thing. It's something which determines you, because I think the whole world tends to live, or I have a totally cosmopolitan thoughts. I really, for me, the matters of differences of religion, nationality, color, really shouldn't matter, except the richness of those things which they can bring. But I'm afraid in the modern world there are more and more stigmas, and people not necessarily, people have a tendency to see things from those prisms. So I can't say initially that I had many friends who were Albanian. Maybe this is also determined. What did I see? Well, coming back to Pristina, first of all, you see those lots. Well, I saw the whole city, which was full of white cars, UN cars. The whole city. In Bosnia, it was not like that. There was many white cars, but not all of them, because there was another life, and this was really the government. So it was like a lot. So since the white cars, UN cars. Like I remember, I came to this Grand Hotel, and every car was white. So it was. I also saw lots of houses which were all under construction, and they were all very big. So it's like a house, but it's very big. It's like 5 or 6 floors. It's a private house, I mean. And later on, I discovered that the Albanians, it's much more kind of a family-oriented, and the goal is for a father to build a house where there will be a floor or an apartment to each child. So if the family has 4, 5 or 6 children, there will be 4, 5 or 6 floors. And also on the ground floor there will be a shop, because there is some business which should be made. So the whole Kosovo at that stage was under construction. There were lots of houses which were growing up with 3 floors, but others built. So it's also added. So there was, I guess there was a feeling that there was initial, that much more international. So my initial interaction was more with internationals, and much more family closure in bigger families, where the image are those houses. And later on, obviously, particularly through journalists, etc., started making friends or meeting people. Now, my job was, and that's, I guess, what makes an interesting experience, or maybe a unique experience, because probably because I was Russian or whatever. In the press office, I was tasked to work with the Serb journalists. Well, it's easier to say that to do that because there were no Serb journalists in Kosovo. None. So, okay, very good. So what am I going to do? But then there was a political task because the elections were coming. And there was something which the international community thought, there was a plan, a strategic plan, and that was called Serb engagement strategy. Very Western word. First elections. Because there was a feeling that the Serbs are not going to vote. So there was an idea, what can we do politically to encourage Serbs vote? And there was an understanding that the Serbs in Kosovo are going to vote if there is a political kind of message coming from Belgrade. But in order for political message to come from Belgrade, you also need media or communication, how it's going to come if there is a wall. So with all these complex things which I'm telling you, basically there was an idea we should work with the Serb journalists. Let's find the Serb journalists. So I'm telling you that because, no, I think it was fantastically interesting. Maybe I'm telling complex things, but also I had, well, I mean, I visited more, not just Mitrovica, but I was visiting enclaves, I was visiting monasteries, I was going to Belgrade. So to a certain extent, I was more exposed to a Serb part of story at that stage in Kosovo, which was an interesting one, a difficult one, very difficult one. How did it look? I went to Belgrade because the Serb journalists were there, and we had an idea of bringing a group of Serb journalists to Kosovo. That was 2 years after the war. We are talking about 2001 autumn. We formed a group of 13 journalists, and I went to Serb newspapers, Serb televisions. I went to meet people. I went to look for them. It was strange to go from Kosovo by car to Belgrade. It was very strange to come from Pristina to this big city, because the really big city, the capital city in all the Balkans, is Belgrade. Hard to say that, but it's a nice place. And I also remember this feeling of kind of dust and generators and all the other things. And that's a very honest thing. When me or somebody else was traveling to Belgrade, that the first dream was to get to the Hyatt Hotel. There was a nice hotel, and to get a bath. So the first thing that you would do, you would fill a bath and sit in it for about 2 hours because there was a feeling to wash out the dust. But I think it came into a quintessential feeling because the conflict was ugly. The feeling of the dust and the dirt and the ugliness which you somehow was getting from Pristina with all the things was also turning into an image of the ugly conflict. And you constantly wanted to wash it out from yourself. And you constantly wanted to find solutions for that, but deep in your heart you were understanding that in those, that there were two parts of the stories. There were very happy, very dynamic Kosovars. There was a flag, American flag or Kosovo flag on every corner. There was huge construction. There was huge dynamics because you felt this incredible happiness and luck of people who somehow it happened that they got what they wanted, and you got a completely different feeling from any place where there were any Serbs, because you got a feeling of a dead end and like not a viable solution. And that's what emotionally, if working in Bosnia, things were very difficult, but there were kind of hopes. There, you know, hope is the last thing which one could lose. There, I think in our international job, you know, or again, all the right things were done for the construction of the Kosovo state, but there was no solution to the Serb question. And that's what all of us felt, like all the time. Now, coming to the journalist. So when I went to talk to the television, I came to the city, and obviously everybody was talking about bombings and about Americans, and I looked like a lunatic coming from Kosovo and whatever, but I didn't realize how bad it was, because on television, we're talking about main Serb television, and I said, how can I help you? They actually said, can you send us a picture of Pristina? I said, what do you mean? And they said, we didn't get any picture for 2 years. Coming from communication, coming from television, this is bad. They really didn't get any physical picture. And one of my jobs, I had to organize, obviously the web was not that developed at that stage, but I had to organize just exchange of simple images. We're not talking about interviews or, I don't know, particular situations, but simple images. So at least Serb media gets that. The visit of 13 Serb journalists from Belgrade, understanding that there is an incredible hunger for information. Hunger. They didn't get any information for 2 years. They get it via, I don't know, CNN, which is a very long way. So that's how they kind of capture, understand what's going on.